this is the first of our BCS Freight Network highlight series. We always talk about how the industry isn't necessarily set up for everybody to win. And it's the idea for all of us to survive in this environment, we need to find people who are trustworthy, dependable, people who actually want to improve the supply chain, people who actually want to make the industry a better place and are doing things to help it be the best that it could possibly be. Because the louder you make the good actors, the harder it is for the bad actors to make any noise and get their hands into the community. So to start off, we've got Matt Silver. How's it going, Matt?
Good. Excited to be back chatting with you again.
The transportation industry, people normally enter it one of two ways, at least on the carrier side. I guess on the freight side, it can be a little bit different. But for the most part, you either are related to somebody or it was an accident and you didn't intend to do it. How did you end up here?
It's definitely the related to somebody category. So I, believe it or not, it was not my first job working in freight. My first job was working at a grocery store in the suburbs of Chicago because my dad basically said if I ever wanted to work for him, I had to learn how to deal with some of, I guess, the worst customers you could deal with. And so first summer, I think I was 16, I worked at a grocery store bagging groceries for people. And I remember getting yelled at for putting the tomatoes on the bottom one time. And I got to bag Billy Corgan's groceries from Smashing Pumpkins. So that was like the highlight of that summer. And then I spent another summer as a cashier where I went from making $7 an hour to $7.65 an hour. And that was like a really, really big jump at the time for, not having to pay rent and not having any cost other than like living at home and going to school. But it was the next summer in 2007 that I actually started working at Coyote as an intern initially. My job was to track freight. So we had a handful of people booking freight at that point. The company was still really early on, and my job was to call drivers and get updates from them. There were no telematics options. There was no macro point or Four Kites or P44. You had to get the phone number from the driver or from the dispatcher, and then you're calling the driver, and you're hopefully not pestering the hell out of them. But at the same time, you needed to get updates for your customer. And so my job initially was to track loads. And then one day, Mark Ford, I don't know if you've not met Ford yet, he's at Highway now, but was at Coyote for a long time, and then Blue Grace and Reliance Partners. Ford came over to my desk and said, "Hey, I want you to try doing this other thing, calling carriers and seeing if they can take freight." And so this is midway through the summer, and my job became calling carriers in the Northeast to try and see if I could get them to move freight from Staten Island, New York to Worcester, Massachusetts for Visi paper. So it was these rolls of paper, 40 to 45,000 pounds. And I would cold call every carrier I could find in Massachusetts to try to find backhaul capacity. But then I would also call carriers in New York, New Jersey. Basically, I had a list of trucking companies, and I would call them and try to get them to take these loads. And I remember Mark said, start at, the starting price, which was I think $400, and don't go above $475, which was the top price in the load. And Staten Island, New York, where you have to pay, I think like $100 in tolls in each direction or something like that. Now it's obviously, I don't think it was that much then, but the cost of the tolls itself, like I think would have eaten up half that rate. Everybody hung up on me. And I got hung up on repeatedly until finally I found somebody that was willing to do it for a really high rate, because they were like, "Well, tell your boss that he can go F himself, and here's the rate." But I remember finding one carrier, this Capilano Trucking. I don't know that they're still around or not, but they ended up being a carrier that one of the reps there booked for a long time after. So that was my big impact that summer, was cold calling on Staten Island, New York, and tracking freight. That was like my first paid version of my job in the freight industry. But then I guess there's one other piece, which is that I was helping with faxes, ordering fax machines, printers, and all that stuff when the company was first getting started, but did not get paid for that.
How did that translate to where you're at and what you're doing now?
Everyone always thinks like nepotism right out of the gate when you're working for your dad. And Andrew also, had to deal with similar stuff, although very different career paths at the company. But we we cared, obviously, like we gave a shit and treated it like it was our family's company. And so early on, it taught me about the concept of ownership and like not just what a stake in the company might look like, which was very small for me, but like more so about taking ownership. And I see it at Cargado every day. I see it with employees that we have that treat the company like it's their own company, like they started it. And I love that because they actually care and they have ownership. They see a problem and they'll just pick it up. They're not going to go, well, that's not in my job description, so I'm not going to deal with it. They'll flag it and they'll call it out for people. And so that concept of ownership early on and tracking freight and having an understanding for negotiating loads with carriers or negotiating rates with carriers and selling freight to carriers, um, all that goes into my entire career. I like had this little tangent where I went into film for a little bit, and I went to a film school, a 2-year film school in Chicago while I was working at Coyote, and tried to go make it in the film industry in LA. And after a year of doing that, it was not clearly not something that was jump starting a career for me. And so I went down to San Diego and started working at Coyote again full time. And so I I spent over a decade, I want to say, at Coyote, between tracking loads and then carrier sales. I did Bazooka support for a while I was in school. So like Bazooka was the TMS that we used there. And so my job was to help, any new employees that were getting onboarded if they needed help with the TMS or permissions. I had all the permission stuff at one point. It's like as a 19-year-old, I mean, it's an early, this is still an early stage brokerage, but um, I did a lot at that point from like an IT perspective, and then all the random stuff that you get thrown at as a young IT kid. And then when I moved to San Diego, I started off doing customer operations. So my job was scheduling appointments for Exide and Interstate Battery, two different battery manufacturers for the automotive industry, and they made the big forklift batteries too for like forklifts at Walmart.
Yeah.
And so all I did all day was like schedule appointments. And I remember one day, the sales rep Lauren, who has those accounts, I think she probably still does, or the iterations of those businesses now. Um, Lauren went to Atlanta to meet with one of those customers with my dad, and they were not thrilled with the service at the time. And so she comes back to San Diego and goes, "Hey, you have a new job. You're not scheduling appointments anymore. Your job is to actually cover Exide freight." And so and interstate battery freight. And so I all overnight my job became developing carrier capacity in Manchester, Iowa, where there was a big battery facility, Salina, Kansas, Muncie, Indiana, Atlanta, Dallas, New Jersey, Vernon, California, like all over the country basically, that I had to like go find these like pockets of these carriers. And not only did I have to find carriers, but I had to find carriers that would haul batteries. And batteries, when they're being recycled, there's this hazmat exemption in place by the DOT that allows trucking companies to haul batteries as long as they're packaged properly
Mhm.
and you're transporting it the right way. You do not need hazmat placards. You don't need a hazmat certified driver. You can haul these batteries. Batteries. There's acid in them still. Like they have acid. They've got lead. Um, there were definitely accidents that had happened in the past that I'd heard about or been tangentially near. And so you had to like convince these carriers to like haul batteries. And the carriers that I ended up booking were the carriers that I would find off of load boards primarily. Like, most of them not like from the US typically. They were usually hanging around waiting for like last minute loads. And because a lot of this freight was hard to cover at the last minute, I was covering Manchester to Salina, or Manchester to Miami, Florida. Nobody wants to go to Florida. Like
Right.
nothing's coming out of there, and you're hauling batteries into there, and then it's like so you can't haul produce out. And so you're there. It was just like nonstop calling not the worst, but like the carriers that wanted higher rates. And so uh, that became like a big part of my book of business was carriers that were like Eastern European basically. And I ended up developing a really good relationship with a lot of those carriers, and I still text those guys randomly. But it became this like weird niche for me. I was booking battery freight all over the country, and I was always booking the freight at the end of the day that was just like nobody else was willing to cover. To the point where, because I was in San Diego when this was happening, 3 o'clock every day Pacific time, which is 5 o'clock Central. Most people were leaving the office at that point in Chicago, but I was still working, obviously. And so anytime there was a late bounce, where a carrier gave a load back, or where a customer called in late and was like, I've got this urgent spot shipment. That would be where I'd make all my money. Would be like the spot loads, the at random, last minute coverage stuff, or FEMA eventually too. So that got me into like booking freight and being more of a carrier sales oriented person, and spent several years doing that. A year in private fleet when I came back to Chicago, and then jumped into Mexico at that point.
I know when I hired recruiters, I would prefer someone who came from a customer service background than someone who actually came from a recruiting background. So I love that. And usually when that's kind of where you started and that's where your heart's at, you tend to do things and push forward in ways that do help the industry. Because if you weren't helping, I don't think you'd be happy.
So I brokered freight for 17 years. Yeah, 17 years. And now I have not for a little over 2.5 years, and I like don't miss it even remotely. But at the same time, it's because I get to live vicariously through over 200 freight brokers that use our software. And so I, whether it's through Slack, through Teams, through text messages, I talk to a lot of our customers on a very consistent basis. And it can be about Mexico strategy. It can be about how to build a centralized carrier network. We've got the spectrum of brokers in our book of business, whether it's people in the top 100 or top 10. Most of the top 10 brokers use our software, half the top 100, and then you've got much smaller brokers that unless it's like a Will Hopkins from Black Box that you see on social media all the time, like you've never heard of them, but they'll run a variation of like 2 or 3 different playbooks, which is the centralized model and the cradle to grave model. And then with the agencies also. And so I've seen the broad spectrum at this point, and it's been fun to be able to talk to leaders from different freight brokerages. I'll shout out Dan from Ally Logistics, who is like deep into vibe coding right now and trying to figure out how to build more tools for his team internally with AI. And you see every potential broad end of the spectrum you get to see in this space. And so I love talking to people about Mexico freight. I'll talk to them about technology. I'll talk to them about carrier sales strategy. Am I your sales go to market expert for how to sell into shippers? I never closed a shipper in my entire life. I helped people close deals. I definitely spent time with some of the biggest shippers in the industry, but like I was never in a customer sales role. Like I never had to carry a quota. I never had my own book of business. I've closed a bunch of our deals here, obviously, but like I was not having to cold call shippers. So I'm not about to sit down and explain how to cold call a shipper. How to cold call a carrier, I can do that in my sleep. But those are 2 different jobs. And like and scheduling appointments, doing stuff at the border in Mexico, I'll go deep on all that stuff with people. But it's half of why I write a newsletter, is to help educate people on how Mexico freight works. So yeah, I like helping people in the industry and then founders that are building tech. As long as it's an area that I can actually help them in, I'll do that a lot.
Yeah, well, and cold calling carriers, that was actually my very first job that I had, was selling ads to carriers, and trying to make it through some of those phone systems to get to a decision maker. Those are some pretty tall gates until you get the idea of how to get around them. But no, that's kind of what I love, is like the idea that you've seen the broad spectrum and you've been around to see enough of a difference, see what does work, what doesn't work, and you've seen a lot of changes that have happened. So, from your perspective, from the time that obviously the way you came in, you've experienced it for a lot longer than even actually being in it. But just in your experience, how has the industry changed from your perspective? And what do you feel like we need to do to make it better?
I used to send drivers to truck stops to fax them rate confirmations when I was booking those movie paper loads. So
Yeah.
I like obviously the industry has come a long way since then. I think honestly, this is a controversial take depending on who you are. If you're my co-founder, Rylan, you agree with it. If you're other people that I'm related to, you might not agree with it. But I think Convoy was one of the most impactful companies in the industry, along with Uber Freight and anyone that was focused on building a mobile app for the industry. And what it did is it forced drivers into using smartphones and downloading mobile apps on their phone. And Convoy went through a lot of money, and we don't need to go down that part of that conversation. But I mean, I will if you want me to. But the the getting drivers to get familiar with mobile apps and the Uberization of trucking very much was a big milestone in this industry because all of a sudden carriers could go on a mobile app and they could book a load.
Mhm.
And it was no longer that you had to wait on hold for somebody. Like I still am like having flashbacks thinking about this right now of having people on hold while taking in phone calls from a load posting on a load board. And then like I'd be halfway through the phone call before I'd be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, man. I just looked up your MC number. You guys are do not use for stealing a load. I can't work with you." Obviously, you wouldn't be that transparent about that, but you'd have to get yourself off the phone at that point. And so, the this industry has definitely moved forward when it comes to getting drivers to use mobile apps, getting brokers using technology. Now, at the same time, people still use the same TMS they've used for 30 years. Met with a customer of ours recently who now uses obviously a much more modern TMS, but they said that their team was just recently had just moved off of AS400 over to the TMS that they're using now. And so in the last like 6 months, I think their team had moved. So this is people still using really old software. And I think it's not like it happens overnight. Obviously, it happened in the US really quickly over a few years time frame because of Convoy and Uber Freight. And now everyone's got a version of a mobile app. We just launched our mobile app recently. This is geared more towards brokers and medium to large carriers than it is to owner operators. But um, the digitization of the industry is happening, and now with AI, I think it's going to take a massive step forward in a lot of different ways that we don't know yet.
AI is moving faster than we thought it would, but it's also moving too slow for a lot of people and they're already fatigued. I think it's because you have a lot of people out here who call things AI, but they're not AI. They're just automated systems and there's actual AI. And I think like there's been a lot of people who've made jokes like if one more person says AI at a conference, I swear, while there is real AIs out there, like can you kind of speak to the difference of those two things and where you think those are split off and like what kind of stuff is going to get left behind and what's the actual stuff that matters we're going to have to deal with like moving forward?
Well, we made it like 20 minutes into the episode before we did talk about AI. So
Right.
listening at home and doing shots along the way. Um, what I'm starting to hear more consistently, and I think I even Rylan talked about this, my co-founder and our CTO, is that it's humans that become the biggest bottleneck in AI because you can't just like if you just have Claude Code creating code and just generating code into your repo and into your entire product, it is going to cause a mess. Like it is not something that's going to be uh, clean and structured the way that you want it to be. If you have a group of engineers that are building software a certain way, just injecting Claude Code generated code is like closer to AI slop that you start to hear about more and more.
Hmm.
And so the concept of enabling our entire engineering team to be able to use agents to build things out and then they review it. So it's almost like each engineer becomes like a little mini engineering manager with a bunch of junior engineers that are all building for them, but they're reviewing everything before it goes through them. And so enabling them to create that funnel of cleaner code and making sure that our rules are in place around how that needs to get structured. Skills and Claude, if you will, where you can say, hey, every single time uh, uh, we push something to production, make sure you do this, this, and this first before it actually goes. And so every single time that happens, it'll just run automatically. And so setting up the team to scale that way is really, really important. And I think that becomes the biggest bottleneck is like, can people review this fast enough? Or do we end up with sloppy stuff that's going into our product? And we don't want things to be sloppy. And so structured information is important for how we build our system. Our team is leaning into it heavily in terms of how they use it, how they access data, how they do their jobs every day. They're using it more and more. We're using it with voice agents. We're building it kind of across how we operate. Um, but so you've got how existing companies start to evolve into AI native companies or AI enabled companies. Then you have the startups that have come recently or over the last couple of years whether it's a Happy Robot or Fleetworks or Vuma or Augment or CloneOps, Chain. I'm probably forgetting somebody. Uh, I've only recently got a demo of one of them for the first time, so it's it like it's exciting to see this stuff happening because you can see what the vision is that you start to hear from people. Like you hear it at the conferences, and that's it's not just like go get a demo of those 6 companies and pick the best one and you're good to go. They're not the same. And so, depending on who you talk to, they're either automating end-to-end, operations for a freight brokerage, or they're automating carrier sales, or they're automating scheduling, or they're automating workflows, or it's all kind of parts of the same thing, and everyone's got that vision to eventually go do everything with AI. But the reality is, it's still gonna be that person that's the bottleneck, whether it's built by one of these companies that truly purely started from an AI native perspective and built every aspect of their business around how the AI experience is, whether it's in a chat experience or a voice experience, or if it's more of a blended UI plus AI experience where you've got a more familiar UI that you're used to using and interacting with, but with supporting technology that can do things a lot faster than you would ever imagine.
I love that your view of tech is like more from like almost like a user standpoint than just nerding out about what it is.
I
In a
don't
lot of ways.
understand the technical stuff. It's all the
Right. Yeah, well, it's like you're talking about living vicariously through all those brokers, like you're seeing everything happen and that kind of stuff. Whereas a lot of people are just like, like, oh, I'm interested in the actual like, how like the code, like you're looking at like what it does and how it does it and how well it does it and that kind of stuff. And I think that's huge because that's a point that a lot of people miss in transportation. I could definitely say from the carrier side, that's a trend that I haven't really called out, but plan to make some movements on in the future, is that the carrier side's been left behind quite a bit. I mean, there's a good example. Uh, once heard someone make a joke a few years ago, like the first TMS that releases that doesn't look like it's Windows 95 is going to win the market. Like it's one of those things where it's like people get tech implemented into at least the carrier side. I don't, I'm not fully versed on the broker side, but like it's like they get it in there enough and they just move on to the next thing. So it's nice to see people like you in there like actually looking at it to figure out who's actually doing it to progress and not just like make a quick buck off a trend.
well, so it's an interesting point. So we build we have a two-sided marketplace, right? Like we've got freight brokers and we've got trucking companies, and we don't charge trucking companies to be able to bid on freight. And so it's effectively free to them right now. And for freight brokers, we charge a subscription model. And so we're not taking a cut of the transaction. Like I don't want to ever get into that with brokers. I didn't ever want that as a broker, like having somebody cut into my margin like that. So
Right.
um
Same
we
thing for drivers.
yeah, well, and we wanna make sure that we're building for both sides, even though the revenue only comes from one side.
Right.
And it's this happens not just in our industry, but like in other industries, marketplaces sometimes favor one side over the other, or it seems like they favor one side over the other. And the when you look at like the TMS category, you generally rarely come across TMSs that are built for both sides, built for a freight broker or built for a trucking company or built for a shipper. But you don't, I mean, yeah, typically you don't build for everybody because everyone operates differently. It'd be like trying to build an operating system for a dentist office and for like a school.
Right.
And like there's like they see people and there's people coming in and out, and but like it's just totally different. Like it's a different system. So on the brokerage side, you don't own assets. On the asset side, you own trucks, and you have to schedule trucks. You have to plan trucks. You have to pay drivers. It is much more of an operating system for a trucking company, whereas a TMS is for a freight brokerage is more of like a component of it, but usually the accounting and everything else is happening outside of it unless you built your own accounting. And so what happens is you look at it's not a secret what like the revenue numbers are for some of the bigger tech companies in the industry and like what they sell into in the brokerage space. And so when you're building a tech company and you're raising money, and you're talking about your TAM, like the total addressable market, you're talking about who you're selling into.
Right.
And if you're selling into 20,000 freight brokers and you go, I can eventually charge them 20,000, 50,000, 100,000, $1 million a year to do this because they're going to rely on my software to do X, Y, and Z, it's a very clear path because these freight brokerages have an owner that's usually public, especially the bigger brokerages, and they are non-asset based. So like they're a much lower risk of going under or having financial issues than a trucking company that has to pay their truck note and their insurance and everything else that goes with operating a trucking company. And so you've got this group of companies that are all building software. You notice how that whole group of companies that I mentioned that are AI oriented, from what I understand, the majority of what they've built, not completely the case, but is more geared towards freight brokers. Because when you sell into freight brokers, you have an entire go to market motion that is to sell to freight brokers. So there, I believe there will be, and there already is a startup I put in an angel check into called Fleetline, that is building AI software for trucking companies. The problem with building software for trucking companies is a couple things. One is the long tail is much longer, so like way more owner operators. It is very hard to sell software to owner operators unless you can absolutely nail the delivery of it and make it really obvious to them that they're going to make more money.
Pretty hard to sell anything to an owner operator. they've been
Yeah.
they've gotten the short end quite a bit.
Correct. This actually goes back to like the topic that we had earlier about selling into carriers and brokers, or sorry, selling to carriers versus selling to shippers. Selling to shippers, you're calling them and asking them for money. You're calling and asking for money and to like trust you not to screw up their supply chain. Trucking companies, you're calling them and offering them freight. I want to give you freight and I'm going to pay you for it. You're not asking them for anything. You're asking them to pick up a load, but like you're offering them money for it. It is way easier to call somebody and offer them money than it is to call and ask for somebody for money. So on the same side of it, like we have this tool that we sell to freight brokers that enables them to price their Mexico and Canada freight immediately on phone calls with customers, like while they're on calls. We've had ship brokers tell us that they're doing that, and they can cover freight, which means they can convert their Mexico freight that they did not convert before. So it is like a slam dunk. Like you're going to make money if we were selling this to trucking companies, going, you might find some business in here, but we can't guarantee that yet until you actually go in there. It would have been way harder to sell them and get them to actually pay for this software. And so we made it free to get them into the network because that's a core part of building out this marketplace. There's other
Mhm.
stuff we can sell them over time, but like making the marketplace access free will continue to be something that we stick by. For selling software to trucking companies, you have two different things that you're going to sell. Either you're going to sell them a way to make more money or you're going to sell them a way to save time and money. And selling somebody that owns a trucking company on saving time and money is a very, very steep uphill battle unless it's a large trucking company with a finance department that actually understands the cost.
Mhm.
From what I understand about the investor conversations that I've had in the past, not about our business, but about like other startups and some of the startup founders that I talk to, it is uh, it's much harder to grok the TAM for the supply side, even though it's like, oh my God, there's millions of owner operators out there and I could sell to all of them. It's like you sell them $1.99 a month app or something like that. You're not going to sell them like the $1,000 a month subscription to an owner operator that
Right.
might gross like, what do they make, like three, four, five, $6,000 a month or a
Yep.
week rather in revenue, and they keep a small fraction of that. So like it's the reason why you don't see as much software being built for trucking companies is because investors are more nervous to back that concept. Beyond like what you've got with like the Samsaras and Motives and like the telematics providers, which are embedded in the trucks, but those are already embedded. So
Mhm.
it's like you're not gonna have an AI version of that. It's like the tools still need to be embedded.
One thing that I learned quickly, like coming more onto like, the freight brokerage side of things, from the carrier side is that carriers are very like it's all implementation. If implementation takes any sort of lift, like you're messing with the program, don't do that. Like, like it's like we have our set thing, we're doing this. If this is gonna possibly throw off anything at all, and we have to do something, you're not gonna come in here and put it in. There's not a huge learning curve, like cool, but like we don't want to interrupt anything at all because, well, I mean, being a carrier, like freight interrupts itself enough. Um, so yeah, and so it's just interesting that like the people that have gotten in there, I wonder if that maybe is why there isn't as much updating and increase as you see, as well as what you're saying. That makes total sense.
It's so complicated. Like, look at, my dad's building Mastery, which is TMS for brokers, shippers, and carriers, or brokers, carriers, and shippers. And I've gotten one demo of it, but I don't have any better sense for how it operates than McLeod or Turvo or Ty, who like those three are integrated with right now, or are integrating with. Um, but what I understand is how big his team is that's building it, the engineering department, the people that come from freight that have come into this business. And uh, from what I've heard, and we've got several mutual customers, including a lot of those big national trucking companies that are on their website, the fact that they're able to work with somebody that can come in and understand how their business operates from like 3 decades of experience in this industry is one of the narrow threads that you can actually, you know, nail, which is like being able to understand and talk the talk, and be able to have a conversation with one of these big companies. Unless you can fully map it and you can fully understand it and they can be fully bought in, it is a massive task.
Hmm.
Getting somebody to switch TMS is like it's hard. Like thinking through when we were at Coyote, we bought multiple freight brokerages during that time. There were multiple companies and integrated them and had to move them over to Bazooka to our TMS. So like that same thing exists, and so you have to. It's you're messing with like everybody's livelihood if you install a system that doesn't work. And so I think to your point, like don't fix what's not broken. Like a lot of trucking companies are very nervous to move off of their current system, or if they have a system, um, or if they're smaller, that Mastery is definitely more for the bigger companies. So like on the smaller side, it just depends. Like I know that there's Alvis, which a lot of people are getting really excited about, and I know that they're very much entirely focused on the carrier side. But that also, if you haven't met or interviewed Nick, you should interview him. But Nick's the founder of Alvis, and he previously had his own company that had assets, and he built the system for himself. So like there's only a handful of success stories that you hear in these categories, and it's usually driven by someone that lived a problem and was like, I'm going to solve this problem for myself if I have to first, and then I'll go do it for other people.
The interesting thing I think that we're trying to do, in general with BCS and like even with these highlight series. So like now someone knows like what you're into and what you do. So it's like if I'm trying to build something, I now know somebody who's a resource. Because it's I think we all need those people, and that's how we get that connectivity. And the whole basis is the assumptions. Like, oh, I know from my side what you do because I can see it over there. But it's like the second you hop over the fence, you're like, oh, this is not the same thing. Like,
The
people.
only people I won't talk to are the people that tell me they're going to automate the whole freight brokerage business away and they're going to connect shippers and carriers directly. And I'm like, no. I'll have a 10-minute conversation with you where I will explain why I think that's a terrible idea and why I experienced that and why you should not do that.
You did experience. You're like, we've got a little bit of time. Can you give me a 5-minute version? What did that look like?
Well, I mean, so when I started Forager, my thought was connect shippers and carriers. We were a digital freight brokerage at the end of the day. Forager was. So like, I guess I skimmed over this part of the story, but like when I left Coyote in 2018, in March of 2018, I had to sit out my non-compete, and then I started Forager in September, October, whatever of 2018. And the initial thought was we're going to build a system that connects shippers and carriers. So we're going to automate all the work that a freight brokerage does into the technology, and we will connect shippers and carriers. And it was the same model that like Convoy and Uber Freight and even Transfix and LoadSmart were like mostly running their playbook on at that point. And so I thought I'll go do that, but for Mexico and Canada, because it's unique, it's niche, and there's a couple different paths that happen. Either this grows and it becomes really successful on its own, or somebody bigger buys us. Having just built a Mexico department inside of a brokerage, I felt like I could maybe incubate one outside of it. And so um, my thought was like, if we could go down this path of getting all these shippers on board, and like I pitched this vision to every shipper that we talked to, and we got big shippers on board. We had big brand name shippers that were using our business and our software every day. Now, the software that we built at Forager was a shipper portal and a carrier portal. So shippers could log into the software. They could get a rate through our system. So we had this like preloaded set of rates that were very different than how Cargado's rates work. And it was not like transactional driven data. It was just data that we had and generated and managed. And so shippers would get a rate through our system. If they liked the rate, they would book the load, and then they would move into they would cover the load with us. We took on the coverage of it, and as a freight broker at the end of the day, we would cover the load. But we had a carrier facing portal also that trucking companies would log into. They would bid on those loads, and they would book those loads through our system. And so we had loads that were getting posted automatically or getting posted by shippers and getting covered by carriers. So our team was not doing any work on most of this freight. We were helping deal with stuff at the border because the plan was to continue to build operations. But um, it was, I remember like late into this process, we had several engineers, we had a carrier sales team, we had a customer sales team, we had operations. Like we were a full blown freight brokerage with the technology team. And it got to a point where we couldn't scale past a certain point, and we started to have these M&A conversations. And I also had a conversation with my dad and was like, this is what's going on. I showed him our financials, and he looks at it and he goes, if you separated out your freight brokerage from your freight brokerage is can pay for itself, and it can operate and it could continue to go. But if you're going to have this tech company at the same time, you can't do both.
Mhm.
You can't have a freight brokerage and a tech company at the same time. You have an identity crisis. And I was like, well, but we're building towards like disrupting freight brokerages, blah, 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 blah.
Disrupting.
And he's like, you're not
Disrupting.
disrupting anything other than like your customers' lives and everybody, blah. And so
Yeah.
we ended up getting acquired, obviously. And um, at that point, I learned, and then I spent like a year and 9 months or whatever to arrive. And I remember having these conversations with people about how, if I could go do Forger all over again, what would I do differently? And my answer was, I would have gone and built the software to help freight brokers do this stuff because I understand how freight brokers work because I was a freight broker for a long time, but I don't want to broker the freight anymore. I don't want to get yelled at by shippers. I don't want the stress at 2 o'clock in the morning of an automotive load potentially shutting down a plant, but I know all the different stuff that goes in all that. And so I want to use what I understand, build it into scalable software, and make that something that any freight brokerage in this industry or 3PL or freight forwarder can use. And so, um, between my background and my experience and Ryland was at Convoy for 8 years. He was there in year one. He was there when the company closed its doors. He just didn't go with the Flexport. He joined me to build Cargado, but he comes from 8 years of experience building in freight and having this massive chip on his shoulder from what the outcome ended up being from Convoy. And so um, it's positioned us to be able to like use this technology to help people. And if I think back, there's like a couple funny things that happened when I was leaving Arrive. When I started to realize like what I wanted to do, and I wasn't ready to talk about it with like people. I told Pi what I wanted to do, but like I wasn't ready to start like sharing that with everybody yet. Told everybody I was going to go build Tinder for the freight industry, and I was going to call it Lot Wizard. And I even made a logo for it. And then the other thing I
Mm,
started telling people was that I wanted to build Slack for the freight industry. And
nice.
um, what's cool is that in like 2 weeks roughly, we're going to be releasing chat in Cargado. And so brokers and carriers will be able to communicate and chat through our software and be able to have conversations just like you would on Slack, but with freight related data as like a throughput for that entire conversation. And so,
Love.
no dating. We're not going to do any dating apps or anything
Yeah.
like that. But
No,
the
I've definitely heard that. I've definitely, especially on the recruiting side, I've heard that like proposed, and then the other way. I've heard it several times. But I love that concept.
you just
But
can't monetize it on the recruiting side. I've heard that pitch 100 times. It's just the ability to turn that into like a venture backable business doesn't mean you can't build it if it's not venture backable. But like people reach out to me to ask about like raising money from VCs, and it's like
Hmm.
some concepts are not meant for VC backing, but like it doesn't mean there aren't investors that would invest in that. It's just not necessarily your traditional seed investor or YC or whatever.
Last question. Passion is important, and so is, we're trying to build a resource base for everybody in the network. So I guess to summarize, what is your biggest passion for the industry? What do you want to see? What it is? What are you most passionate about? And how would you like to be a resource to the industry? Like what could someone ask you for help with, or your thoughts on, that would just make your face light up and be like, oh yeah, let's nerd out about this?
My passions are definitely Mexico freight.
Yeah.
It's Mexico and Canada freight, but it's okay. So when you look at how a cross border Mexico load moves, there's 8 different parties involved in a cross border load. There's a Mexican carrier transfer company, a U.S. trucking company, Mexican customs broker, U.S. customs broker, Mexican facility, a U.S. facility, potentially cross dock in Laredo or whatever border city it is. 2 different languages, 2 different cultures, a border. Um, there is all this complexity, and I talk about this in the webinars that I do for like the Mexico 101 webinars. It is controlled chaos. It feels chaotic when you look at it and you see all the emails and the WhatsApp messages and everything else. But the reality is it's a playbook that's running over and over again. So when you're moving freight for an automotive company, for example, whether it's an OEM or a tiered supplier, they run a playbook every single time. They send you their SOP when they get you onboarded. Like they go on Tuesdays, it's at 8 a.m. It needs to arrive on Wednesday at 4 p.m. It needs to cross by Thursday, and then it needs to and it's very much by the book and like clockwork every single time. And it's overwhelming at first when you don't understand what's going on with it, and then when you start to realize like it is a process that just runs over and over again, that you can eventually automate it and you can understand it and you can map it. And so um what I get the most excited about what we're building in particular is, and passionate about, is solving that whole complexity of it. Like today we help brokers cover their or price their freight and cover their freight, and that's something we built. We literally started the company October 10/4. Our founding date is 10/4, by the way, for freight people on purpose. And so October 4th, the company started of 2023. We started building the software in like December of that year, and we launched the carrier side of it 2 years ago, like right around today, actually. So in February of 2024. And so it's only been 2 years that we've been really doing this. And we've built a marketplace and we've built a market rates tool that is based on bid data. And so we have the ability, we've got the runway, we've got the amazing team to be able to go build the structure for how freight moves across the US Mexico border and how freight moves across the US Canada border, and pull all of that in and bring Mexico and Canada freight online. And so I know that problem really well. I couldn't get on the phone and solve a problem with a customs broker at this point the same way like Miguel from my team can, the Mexican freight Jedi. But um, I know that our customers will be able to with our software, and so that is the thing I'm the most excited about. Now, I think there's more for this industry that's going to continue to evolve, and I think that we're going to see. Um, I don't think we're going to see the same names for a very long time. At some point, I think things will start to shift in this industry, um, from a technology standpoint. And what was your other question?
Wanting to be a resource and being passionate about it inside the BCS Freight Network, like what would you want people to reach out to you for help with, to help make things better?
My favorite message I get from people on LinkedIn is, "We keep passing on this Mexico freight from my customer. Can you explain what we should be doing with it?" There is a like whether you are a small freight broker that has 10 customers and a couple of them have Mexico opportunities, or whether you're somebody that's got thousands or hundreds of shippers that you're working with, and you've got this massive sales floor of people that are trying to build your business, domestic US truckload drive-in freight is not the way to go like win this industry right now. It is just not where the money is. And so I love talking to people about Mexico freight, obviously, about Canada freight, about building software. Um, I'm trying to pick and choose my time I spend. So like can only talk to so many more founders right now. But to me, the biggest thing would be freight brokers that are trying to expand into Mexico or Canada, or trucking companies that want to expand into Mexico. Any carrier that's willing to start sending their trailers into Mexico that doesn't currently, I will spend time with their team and explain how to do it and teach them how to do that stuff. I think there's a need for more capacity for Mexico freight. And so, if you own trucks and if you've got the infrastructure and the ability to invest in the trailer pool. So if you're a trucking company that wants to service Mexico, you have to have at least twice as many trailers as you have trucks, but ideally 3 times. You got 100 trucks, you should have 300 trailers, because those trailers are going across the border into Mexico with partner carriers. They're going to be down there for a week, maybe 10 days before they come back up. And so you need a pool of trailers. But if you're willing to do that, I will go really deep and I will connect you with the right people, help you get connected. So anybody that's interested in investing in Mexico or Canada, I will talk to.
So you started to touch on the future and names not being the same. Can you do that really quick? Because I don't know where you're going, but I want to hear it.
I think the way that people do their jobs is changing. I think the way that people that work at freight brokerages do their jobs, whether they're covering freight and how they're covering freight, or whether they're tracking freight or how they're tracking freight, there will be more modern software that will help people do their jobs, whether it's whatever aspect of the industry. The last 3 weeks, I was able to build an entire internal operating system for our team with Claude Code. Me, not like a group. It's not perfect. It is definitely not perfect. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. Or like how much of it actually gets put into operations with our team, like needs some work. But like the fact that I was able to do that without any sort of engineering background tells me that people are going to be building great software for this industry, whether it's us building more tools for other brokers and carriers in this industry and other spaces, whether it's what Highway is doing right now, what Genlogs is doing right now. Like there are going to be new options in this industry for how people do their jobs. And I don't think that, the people that have gotten comfortable are going to continue to be comfortable for that much longer.
If someone wanted to reach out to you, what are the best ways to get a hold of you?
LinkedIn, X, subscribe to my newsletter, congrats on all the progress.com. It's because VCs always used to send emails and congratulate you on your progress at the end of it. And it always sounded like complete bullshit based on the information, like based on whatever you told them. They're like, congrats on all the progress. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to start a blog and call it that. And so I bought that domain name years ago. And then when I started my blog, I was like, I'm going to use that as the name. And so anytime I email with an investor, like here's a link to my blog if you're interested in learning more about Cargado. Because I've written about what we're building, why we're building it. I write a lot about like what I've learned as a founder. And it's, when I first, right before I started Cargado, I ended up having a conversation with Santosh from Dynamo Ventures, a VC firm based in Chattanooga. That does goes deep on supply chain and logistics. And his advice to me about starting Cargado as a second startup, having seen, me through building Forager, was write down the mistakes that you made and like have a transparent conversation with yourself about what you would do differently. And there's a million mistakes that I made. And like, I'm constantly trying to avoid making more of them. And I write about it because of that. And I will talk about it with other founders because of that. Some stuff I'll write about, some stuff I'll talk about them in private, but like, nobody is up into the right all the time. And to me, it's sharing that story with people so that if they are going to go start a company, that they're doing it with eyes wide open and that they're not just like being, I learned something that took me 3.5 years. If I look at the FreshX team, for example, building Reefer LTL, a really cool product, they started as a Reefer LTL freight brokerage. And I was like, please don't do that. Like, please don't do that. I beg you not to do that. And after a month, they came back to me and they're like, this was terrible. We're not going to keep doing the brokerage thing. We're just going to build the software. And I was like, all right, it took you guys a month. It took me 3.5 years. So I'm glad it only took you guys a month and me pushing on you, and they're doing really well. And you have lots of mutual customers because of the fact that there's riches in the niches. And so it's like Mexico, Canada, Reefer LTL, go get all of it.